From UGAsports.com, this is the Dawg Days podcast, returning for the football offseason. I'm your host, Dayne Young. This is the podcast where we chat with former Georgia Bulldogs about their eras in Athens. You can scroll back in this feed to hear some from last football offseason, including Keith Marshall, Terrence Edwards, Ryan Rankin, Marlo Herrera, Aaron Davis, and more. On this episode, we get the perspective of a parent of a former Georgia football player and what entailed in the family support needed during their time in Athens. Jayson Stanley was a wide receiver for Georgia, and we're speaking with his mother, Yvette Stanley. Here she is. This is the Dawg Days podcast. I'm your host, Dayne Young, and I'm joined by Yvette Stanley, mother of Jayson Stanley, who played for Georgia as a wide receiver from 2015 to 2018. Yvette, I'll just start with this because I love getting the mother's perspective from a former player. Why don't you just tell us what's going on with Jayson now? I know it's off season for most NFL teams, so why don't you just tell me what's going on in his world and for your family?
Okay, that's a great start. So Jayson is currently, of course, training and making sure that he stays in shape. He started out his career with the NFL as an undrafted free agent and started with the Atlanta Falcons. And then the last game of the preseason, he injured his shoulder, and it was minor, but significant enough that they actually gave him an injury settlement. And so he cut ties with the Falcons and then went on to heal and get better. And then lo and behold, he landed with Miami for a position on their practice squad. And from there ended up, got cut from there. They actually brought in Talib, who is a seasoned corner. And what's interesting about Jayson is that his whole career through college, he was a wide receiver and special team guru, and ended up actually getting into the NFL as a corner, something he had never played before, ever. But he made it work, and he impressed the Falcons enough and Miami that they took him on. And so when he left Miami, of course, he continued to be blessed with opportunities to try out for other teams throughout the season. And in week 17, he was picked up by the Jacksonville Jaguars, and Jacksonville had him on their practice squad. And at the end of that time, he had still been interviewing with other teams, and it came to be like a push-pull situation, and he was recruited by more than one team, and I won't say the other teams, but ultimately ended up with the Jacksonville Jaguars and signed a 2-year deal. So long story short, when the season starts again, he'll be back in Jacksonville, and right now he's grateful for that. We don't have to worry about where he's going to be when training season starts, because he'll be with the Jacksonville Jaguars. So we're all in.
I'm sure your family is excited about that, because that's not a far travel at all to go see him play.
No, and we've been down that road many times, as you might imagine. We've been to that game so many times. And so for us, Jacksonville is a place we're familiar with, and we have some ties there, and we are excited about it for him. He's worked very hard.
And Yvette, tell me what you do as well. You were telling me a little bit before we started recording that you work with people that are doing transitions in their lives, which is interesting because Jayson just underwent such a big one leaving college within the last couple of years. So what do you do in your world?
So for me, I am a healthcare consultant. I help transform operating rooms so that people have a better experience. A lot of times when people have surgeries, they don't know what to expect, and they're very apprehensive. And the firm that I work for is instrumental in changing that behavior and transforming so that operating rooms are more efficient, and that nurses, surgeons, anesthesiologists are in a better place when they come to work, and therefore it puts the patient in a better space. So that's what I do on a daily basis. I travel all over the country and talk to a lot of people and hopefully impact their lives in ways that is meaningful and makes them better. So I like to leave places better than I found them. That's kind of what we do.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'd like to go back to some of Jayson's youth. When did you first realize that he had an interest in athletics, but even beyond that, that he was really good at them?
So I have to admit that I am not athletic. That would be my husband, Jimmy. My husband is it's a funny story, but it's true. He is a All-American Hall of Famer from Georgia Tech. A lot of people did not know that, but they will now. So Jayson gets his athleticism from his dad. When did I know that he had it? Very early. We have two sons, actually. We have an older son, Jeremy, who is also athletic, but not interested. He's an arts guy. Mm-hmm. But Jayson, I would say maybe around 5, 6. I have a picture of Jayson holding a football with a sweater on, a green sweater with a football on the sweater. And I look back at that picture recently and say, oh, yeah, that would be when. He has always been competitive, no matter what it is. And he loves what he does. He started out with track, and he would tell track coaches, I'm running track to play football. And so at a very early age, that's who he's been. He's always said he wanted to be a professional football player.
Did he grow up a Georgia Tech fan with those Tech ties?
I don't know if he was a Georgia Tech fan. That was what our household knew. And so we had a lot of ties. I mean, our family, a lot of our friends, my husband's friends, they're tech guys. They're tech people. And so when Jayson came home and said that he was interested in coming to Georgia, we're like, okay, well, we can check it out. I mean, literally, there were a lot of teams that were interested in him, so a lot of schools. So we just let him make that decision, and it was the right decision. I mean, from the day we set foot on campus at Georgia, I mean, at first I poo-pooed what he said. It's like, oh, you want to go to Georgia? I'm like, yeah, right. But I went. He knew. He told the people at Georgia, if my mom's not happy, I can't come. So he did a really good job telling them of what my expectations were for his education and for what I wanted him to participate in, and they delivered it.
They always say you have to recruit the mom. That's crucial.
That's very true.
In his high school days, I was reading an article that he did with GeorgiaDogs.com, and he had mentioned one of his high school teammates passing away, and that was something that continually inspired him. That's got to be so difficult to go through at that age, and it seemed like it was a freak accident. How did that affect him and your family?
It's something that's changed our lives. So Trey was a kid that we knew and loved. And Jayson actually, the day that Trey passed away, he was scheduled to come and spend the night with us after the game. Mm. And so his backpack was in our car. So that's how close they were. They were very close. And Jayson went through a really hard time trying to come to terms with someone that he was really close to, that he called his brother, just one day gone and literally dying in front of him. That was a difficult thing, but it has it's changed all of us. We are a loving Christian family, and it's drawn us closer to the Lord. But it's been hard. It really has. It's still. I mean, that happened. Jayson's first game of his junior season, and that was what 6 years ago. It was difficult,
and
it's
it was
still hard to digest.
And it was an on the field injury that led to, like, so it was something that
Yes.
happened in football, correct?
Yes, it was. He delivered a hit. He didn't get hit. He delivered a hit, and he fell, got up, fell again, and he never got up again.
And how do you even begin? And I guess this is where some of what you do for a living may help you, but as a mother, when that happens, I mean, it's traumatic for everyone there. But your heart has to immediately go to your son, right? And this, this is someone else that was a son to you. How do you even begin to help him cope? Because most teenagers, most adults aren't prepared to cope with that. But teenagers for sure, that's even more difficult.
If I take myself back to that night, I can say two things that helped us to cope with that. And first, it was my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and then my husband. Because when that news was delivered, my husband was there. And I can remember us all, the community of Fairburn, being in the parking lot and waiting and waiting and waiting, and then getting that news that he didn't make it. It was devastating, but my husband was the one that took Jayson and walked him through that parking lot in the middle of the night. And it wasn't just Jayson. It was like, oh God, this is a tight football community. And it was a lot of us, a lot of parents and kids. And I remember being the one to tell the coaches that he didn't make it, and them being in disbelief. And Jayson, I mean, literally, it was tough, but I'm so grateful that my husband was there, and he's always been there for us and our kids, and then for us to have our relationship with Christ. But the days ahead were very difficult, and when times got difficult for Jayson, just in growing and developing into a college student, that was a hard thing for him to keep looking at, because his commitment was not only to fulfill his dream of becoming a professional football player, but for him to live out something that Trey couldn't do.
So you weren't surprised that Jayson continued to play football? Because I have to imagine
Oh,
at some point, I would think most people that go through that have a pause and say, this happened. But it sounds like that maybe that was his happy place anyway.
Yeah, I don't know that he ever thought, because that happened with Trey that he wanted to quit football ever. In fact, it may have driven him harder, because I don't know that, well, people that know him know that the reason he wore number 2 at Georgia was because of Trey. That was his number. Jayson was number 11. So when I tell you he took this to heart, if you look at his post, everything, like, this has changed his life. When he responds to me and says, Mom, I love you too, in text, it's I love you, and it's number 2. It's not TOO.
So it's everywhere. It's a part of everywhere in his world.
Yeah, it is.
I want to move ahead to some of the recruitment stuff, because, as I said, you always have to recruit the mother. And Jayson, as fast as he was, like you said, many teams were interested in having that speed on their roster in some way or another. Obviously, he's proven that that's a valuable skill, having never played cornerback and now flipping to be an NFL defensive back. I mean, that's crazy when you think about it, but that just goes to show what raw speed and athleticism can really translate into with some coaching and some hard work. So as a mother, what is that recruiting cycle like? Because it's 24/7 for the coaches. I'm assuming it's the same way for the parents, right?
Yes. One of the things that was unique, though, about Jayson was he's an independent person, and he likes to demonstrate that he can do things on his own, and recruitment was part of that, even at that age. So although the letters and the calls and things were coming, he managed a lot of that. And we told him, okay, you narrow this down to 5 schools. And when you get this narrowed down to 5 schools, then we're going to get involved. And he did that. And I can remember driving him all over. We went to Alabama, Tennessee. We went to, of course, Georgia. We went to Central Florida. We went all over in driving distance for him to visit all these schools and unofficially to get a flavor. And it was me driving him, loading him up with him and his friends, of some who were recruited as well, and saying, okay, guys, go see what you think. And them pulling me in and taking pictures of all these places. And then when we got it down to 5 and then 3 and then 2, then my husband and I said, okay, let's decide. And then we circled back to a couple of schools. We did, to make sure. When we got down, I think it was like a month before. He was committed, but it was right before signing. So we were able to, he did a lot of the lead work, but then we got involved when he narrowed it down. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, it did. What's your role? You say you drove around to all these different schools. Is it pretty much drop them off and pick them back up when they're ready? Or,
oh, no.
Or are you walking around the whole time?
No.
I didn't assume so.
Oh, no. No, we did not leave him anywhere. I can't remember. No. No. We were always there.
That's a good
mom. It was a lot of work.
Opinion.
Yeah. It was a lot of work. Every weekend we were somewhere.
What were you looking for in a school from him?
So I was looking for, it was 2 things. Academics was number 1 for me. And at the time, I have to admit, I was naive, okay? My husband knew more about the college world and all of the playing time and all that than I did. My husband was looking at, okay, where is he going to get playing time? How is this going to work for him in terms of how many wide receivers do they have? And, that kind of thing. So, and I was worried about, well, where is he going to live? So it was different, mom, dad role.
Mm-hmm. Who was his primary recruiter for Georgia? Do you remember?
I do. It was Tony Ball and Coach Rick.
Together.
And Coach Bobo. So it was the 3 of them. And I'll have to say it was the 3 of them because I remember Jayson, him being really recruited, and I had not been to Georgia, and Jayson had been there a few times with my husband and with his cousin, Jonas Jennings, and it was like we were at a football game, and Coach Bobo came to see Jayson, and I didn't know who he was, and he walked up to me, and he was like, do you know who I am? I was like, no, I don't know who you are. What? So I remember him coming to the school, then Coach Rick coming to our house, and then Coach Ball on a few occasions. And then right after Jayson signed, Coach Ball was gone, which I was so sad for that. But that's what happens.
That's the dark business of it, that these relationships get made, and in a lot of cases, a lot of promises get made, and they don't end up being fulfilled for a variety of reasons, and some of it is the business behind the coaching aspect.
It's a lot of dynamics, yeah.
When Coach Rick's in your house, are you cooking for him? Or are you having food brought in? What is the dynamics of that?
So the Stanleys, we don't bring food in.
Well, I need to come over sometime then.
we cook. And I can remember being on the road and coming in from travel, and them coming in like 2.5 hours after I landed, and me running around. So we had burgers, baked beans. I don't know if we had French fries, but I remember we had that, and we had some type of dessert. And I remember, and I know who else was instrumental. I can't remember his name. That's terrible. He's with South Carolina now. But anyway.
Thomas Brown, Brian McClendon.
Yeah. And I remember him and Coach Rick coming to the house, and, Coach Rick was hungry, and he ate. But we had a nice visit. Yeah. It was good.
What are those conversations like? Because, it's obvious why he's there, but is it genuinely just relationship building, or is it just active pitching of what, in this case, what UGA could be for Jayson?
For me, awkward. I mean, the pitch, yeah, there was a pitch, but I think that they knew that Jayson was pretty much set on Georgia. He was pretty vocal about it. So I just felt awkward, because, you have these people come in your home and you don't know them, and it was just different.
Do you think it was awkward for your husband?
No. Jimmy knows no stranger. No, not at all.
It could be different roles in the household. It's different things.
Definitely.
Did Jayson? I know you said that he was on Georgia for a while, but was there a last-second push from anyone else that made him kind of pause? Because if I remember right, Alabama made a pretty strong push. Correct?
Alabama, Miami, and University of Central Florida.
All great schools.
Great schools, great programs.
Also a little bit further from home for you.
That didn't really bother me. I never expected Jayson to be in state, so that was a bonus.
What about did Nick Saban, was he one that you fed in your house?
No, I did not. He called a lot. It was a unique thing. He called. He knew a lot about me. I was shocked at that, but yeah.
That's part of the business of it too, that can sometimes seem a little invasive, I would say. But the research is done on everyone that, in this case, who Jayson would know and care about. And I could see how that could be a strange feeling as well.
Yeah, it's kind of strange.
So he commits to Georgia. Well, we did mention this. You told me this before we started recording, that you developed really good relationships with some of the other players that would be on visits with Jayson, and one of those being Terry Godwin from Hogansville.
Yeah. So if I go back to Jayson being recruited, one of the reasons he was highly recruited beyond his abilities was his performance at the Rising Senior Bowl. That was something that was put on in Atlanta. Joe Burns was one of the founders of that organization. And Jayson got exposure. He was the MVP of that game. And in that game, there were a lot of players, and I'll mention Natrez Patrick. I want to say that it was, of course, Terry Godwin, several guys from the Atlanta metro area that were in that game that said, I'm going to go to Georgia. And so from that day, those guys that joined the class that came in that year, a lot of them came from Rising Senior. So I formed relationships, and my husband did, with those family members, with those parents, and the kids formed these relationships coming into Georgia.
And I always was, with that particular class, and some of the others after it too, I was always fascinated with how mothers like you, like Olivia Godwin, if you want to go after even maybe like Lee Fromm, how active and even on social media sometimes available, but just how involved you were with fans. Because sometimes I felt like that was a rarity beforehand. I would see the same thing with Juanita Holloman, but it was just kind of a different perspective. And really one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because that was kind of a more public leap than I think some parents are willing to make. And I'm sure you received probably some comments about that you didn't like too. So what was the decision behind that to be available in the process to fans?
So you heard me say that my husband knows no stranger. He knows no stranger. Mm-hmm. And when Jayson arrived on campus, of course, fans would come into play, and they would, approach us. We'd go to tailgates, and they'd be like, hey, the Stanleys, can you come and have a burger with us? Can you stop by and, hang out with us? And we were like, well, sure. Now, I'm more reserved. I'm very cautious. And my thing is game day is all about what does my son need to be able to feel successful. And he knows that I'm there for him. So we did a lot of splitting up. Like he interact with the fans more than I did. And my husband is not a social media person. So you would see fans reaching out to me, but really wanting to reach out to my husband. So that's kind of what that's about.
Because I would imagine in your line of work, it probably helps you to be somewhat active on social media, so you can keep touch with people that you've worked with in different places, right?
Well, some of that is, yes, keeping up with the people that I worked with in different places. But my sole reason that I even have social media is so that I could keep up with my children. Mm-hmm. Because prior to Jayson being recruited and all this going on, social media was not a part of my life. I developed my accounts because I wanted to see what my son was talking about on social media. And if he wasn't saying what he needed to be saying, then I was shutting it down. So that's why I had social media, the primary reason. It's morphed into other things. But I use it now as a tool to spread who I am as a person and hopefully steer people to Christ.
That's awesome. I love that.
Thank you.
I know Jayson that was a talented group of receivers that he came in with and that were already at Georgia. So I know playing time was something he had to fight pretty hard for, and he gained a name for his effort on special teams, especially. Was that ever frustrating for him? Because this is what a lot of fans don't always think about, is that to get to the level of a UGA or an Alabama or any of the other schools that were interested in Jayson, you were the best player on your high school team, or you grew up being among the best in your area. And when you get to a place like this, that competition sometimes can be a little different. And I'm not saying Jayson didn't have competition in high school, but what I'm saying is that it's just a higher level of performance on a daily basis. How did he handle that?
Um, he worked hard. He worked a lot in the off season. He did a lot of extra things to try to get playing time. But, it's all about, okay, what type of offense are they running? Are they running the ball or are they throwing the ball? It's so many different things that come into play. So was it discouraging for him at times? Of course, because he's used to being one of the primary receivers. But even in high school, Jayson's always been a person that worked hard to get on the field. When he wasn't a receiver as a sophomore, a freshman, because there was other people ahead of him, you know how he got on the field? He learned how to kick. He's a hell of a punter.
Really?
Yeah. So he did everything he could. It didn't matter. So when they didn't put him on the field to be the receiver at Georgia that he knew he was, even with the speed, then he said, okay, I'll do special teams. And he learned every single position. That has propelled him now, today. So not uncommon.
And now he's playing defensive back in the NFL. So
Well, and you know what's really funny is that he's playing defensive back, but Jacksonville recruited him to not only be a D-back, but a receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So he's listed as both, and he's been practicing as both. That's amazing to me.
Because those can be very different. I don't know if fans realize a lot of the same principles can be there, but the process of doing them is almost opposite in some ways. So
Right.
that's a big skill set. One of the things that I remember vividly about Jayson that stood out to me was there was a play his senior year, and you may have the memory that you can remember who it was against, but it was a goal line run, and Jayson ended up blocking a defensive end who I would imagine was a good 60 pounds heavier than him. And he handled him. And to me, I looked at it and I said, that's how he gets on the field. Because he's willing to do things like that I think a lot of other players maybe not are willing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when a guy his size can block a defensive end in the red zone, that was one of the more impressive things I've seen in the last couple of years at Georgia. And I'm not saying this just because I talked to you. I threw this all over Twitter, that he made this block and it set up a touchdown for Georgia. Where does that fight come from him? Because it sounds like you say it's been there virtually his whole life.
So I would say that he gets that from both of my husband and I. We are both fighters. We have worked really hard to get to this place in our lives. And we both come from a background where we didn't come up with a silver spoon. We have worked to gain every dime we have and everything that we have. And we instill that work ethic in our children. Jayson is tough. We taught him not to quit ever. And there have been days when he wanted to quit, and we would not let him, because we know that at the end of the day, quitters don't win.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that play that you're talking about too, because it kind of was all over Twitter and people had a clip of that. And but Jayson learned to block even though he wasn't being thrown the ball. If you look at statistics, how many times the ball was thrown to him while he was at Georgia, it's a handful.
Yeah.
It's not even two handfuls. But he still made the best of it, and it got him what results? He's where he needs to be.
And where he dreamed to be.
Exactly. So we explained to him, and people should live by that. Everyone's path is not the same. It's not. And when kids are being told, oh, we're going to give you playing time and all this stuff, always remember that your path is never going to be the same as someone else's.
What's it like to be a parent that when you do the travel of a football season? Because I remember I didn't know you personally at the time, but through that same era, as I told you, I would see Olivia Godwin at a lot of these road games. And I'm sure you were there too at a lot of them. What's that like? Because I know for a family, that's a lot of money and time and travel that's being invested on weekends while the parents are still working during the week. So it's a full life commitment. How did you and your husband handle that?
So I travel for a living, and I'm blessed in that I travel for a living and I get points for hotels and I get points for airline and car rental. And our family was blessed that we didn't pay a lot of money to go anywhere. And we never missed a game. We went to every single game, away and home.
Wow.
And that was fortunate for us. Now, we had friends, and I mean, like I said, I've become close friends to a lot of parents that were at Georgia and still there. And it was hard for them, and it's hard because it's a lot of financial obligations. And let's not forget about these siblings. People think that you only have one child, and that's the child playing football. But the truth is you've got more than one. Most did. And the challenge is meeting the other siblings, their obligations, and supporting them and making them feel included when you've got this other thing going on. That was our challenge, to make sure we maintain that balance. But the financial part, I'll have to say, we were blessed because we didn't pay a lot. I used a lot of points. I lent out some points too.
Well, for that national championship run, you needed every point you had, I'm sure, because it seemed like they were all over the country that season.
Yeah, we made it work, but it was. I'm a planner too. When I first started the job, the place I'm working now, I was a project manager, so I'm a planner. And so I was the mom that pulled the moms together and said, hey, we need to book hotels. The schedule came out today. Let's book the hotels. So we were literally booking hotels in advance of the whole season. People would call me and say, do you know where I can get a room? I'm like...
like you're their travel planner.
It was true. I mean, Olivia and we would sit down. I would say, Olivia, you have got to get your room going. She was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I promise you I'm going to get it done. And sometimes we weren't in the same hotel, but we were right down the street. So, and then when the new parents came in, like the Swifts and the McGee's, and I mean, we just brought them in and said, you've got to do this. You have to do it, because if you don't, you're not going to have a place to stay. You're going to sleep in the car. So we did it. Just made it work.
Do you have a favorite game memory or game weekend memory? A lot of people either point to the Notre Dame weekend or the Rose Bowl. I know Atlanta, the national championship, was different because that's at home. But was there a certain one that stuck out for your family?
So there's a home game and then there's a away game.
Okay.
The home game was the game when Jayson played and got a touchdown. His only touchdown of his collegiate career. I went to the stadium that day, and I'll never forget, it was my husband's birthday. And my husband said, for my birthday, I'm getting a touchdown. And I was like, Lord, please, we need a touchdown from my son today. And when Justin threw that ball to Jayson, I was like, oh my God, it really happened. That was the most memorable and most rewarding for me. The second runner-up was when we went to the Rose Bowl, and Jayson didn't play in that game, but it was the experience in itself. That game was incredible from beginning to end. The whole experience. I had wanted to go to the Rose Bowl and to the Rose Bowl parade my whole life. And that happened, and I'll never forget it. Those two, nothing like it.
And he may not have played, but kind of the spirit that he played with of special teams, I'll never
Mm-hmm.
forget Tay Crowder with that onside kick, because if that doesn't happen and he doesn't get on the ground as quick as he does, then
Yep,
Rodrigo's field goal is not possible, and that second half comeback probably doesn't happen.
that's right.
And so, that effort that Jayson displayed on special teams, that's a mentality, and that kind of stuff gets contagious on teams. And
Yeah.
especially, I think that's one of the things that Kirby Smart wanted to institute when he came in. And that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the coaching change, because Mark Richt obviously recruited Jayson, and
Mm-hmm.
then the coaching change happens. I know that can be
Mm-hmm.
difficult on families. It can be difficult on fans or people that don't have the personal relationships. But how did you all navigate that?
So Kirby was recruiting Jayson when Jayson was over at Alabama. Okay, so
So that helped.
that helped. That helped a lot. Um, so it wasn't like we didn't know Kirby at all. We did. Um, but then the coaching changes was something that happened from day one. He'd been through his career at Georgia. Went through 4 receivers coaches,
Mm-hmm.
4, and one before he even got there. So it was hard, but we taught our kids that man does not order your steps; those are ordered by the Lord. So we had to keep reminding him, you can't look at the man. You got to look at what you need to do to get where you need to be. So, that's hard to tell a kid. It's hard for an adult to swallow,
Mm-hmm.
but that's the way we live, and we have to, help him navigate through that. But I think that Jayson adjusted, sometimes kicking and screaming, but he adjusted. And he and Kirby had a great relationship, and they still do. He's very supportive of Jayson, a huge advocate of his. And so, it's just attitude. It's all about attitude.
Is there anything, because we probably should wrap this up here in a second, just because I've taken probably a little bit more of your time than I even told you I would, and I apologize for that. Is there anything just about the parent experience of being the parent of a player at a place like Georgia, with the demands that come on Jayson, but then also the demands that come on the family? Is there something about that experience that you would want fans to know? Because one of the first things that I see is that some of the things that wind up being on social media or that players
Mm,
end up seeing, it's just got to be so hurtful.
mm. Yeah. Um, one of the one of the things that I say is that these kids belong to families, and these parents that see social media, they see what you say. And I've blocked many people. Have no problems with it, because you can sit behind a keyboard and type things and say stuff and never even been on the field before, never even known what it's like to have a workload of academics and sports and practice and being away from your family and having to really guard yourself. So be careful how you treat people, because that is something that can be a disaster. And to embrace fans that are true. I I'll tell you, I've become friends with some of these fans, and some of them I love dearly. But if they step across the line, I let them know it. I let them know it. And they might not like it, but it's okay. They know that Mrs. Stanley is going to give them the truth regardless. And I'm going to speak up. I'm going to advocate. If you're talking about one of the boys or one of the players, I'm going to say something because they don't know all the facts. They're just on the other side.
Well, and I think what happens a lot of times is that because of the spectacle that SEC football is, the size of that stadium, the money that gets pumped into the broadcast and the marketing of it, and then the sheer competitive nature of it, I think some people forget that these are teenagers out there, that they're not fully formed adults that have life experience to be able to fully handle what that is. Now, some of them do. Some of them handle it just fine, and they can let it slide off their backs. But like you said, every one of those guys out there playing, they come from a family somewhere.
That's right. And if they don't have a family somewhere, they definitely don't need somebody to bash them down because they make a mistake. Mm-hmm. So, we just have to be careful how we treat each other. And I have to say that the passion that the fans have, the Georgia fans have, the SEC, that is something I'll never forget. And I'm a part of it. I'm SEC till the hills come. This is who I am. And we love it. It's nothing like SEC.
It's quite a ride, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it is.
I'm sure you look at the parents of freshmen, and maybe some that could be coming from Creekside here in a few years. You never know. I'm sure you look at them and just say you have no idea what you're about to go through, but you won't forget it.
Right. We talk. Well, I've been privy to be able to talk to the incoming freshman class every year, and I tell them, you think you have no idea.
Yeah. Well, Yvette, this has been such a delight. Thank you for making the time in your travel schedule and in your family schedule to kind of give us some insight to what it's like to be so close to a program like this, but then also to kind of have enough of a healthy distance as well, because it can be encapsulating. And I just think the perspective that the mothers have is very unique, not only from the recruiting side, but you're the support system when things are not going, like in this case, Jayson probably wanted to at certain times, just because over the course of a football tenure, that happens.
Right. Stay the course.
Well, thank you for your time. If we can ever do anything for you, like you said, you're a part of everything about Georgia, and at UGAsports.com, we like to kind of be a part of that too. So thanks for your time, and hopefully our paths will cross again.
All right. Thanks, Dayne, for reaching out.
Big thanks to Yvette Stanley for joining us here on the Dawg Days podcast. I hope you enjoyed that perspective of a player parent as much as I did. It really does take a whole support team for each of the guys on a team at this level to do what they do, both academically and athletically. Again, the Dawg Days podcast is presented by UGAsports.com. You can sign up right now to become a member and just try it out. 30 days free, promo code UGA30. That's if you want 30 days free to see if you want to become a member of UGAsports.com. Until next time, I'm Dayne Young.